So who will be the last man standing, given that there are intense attacks taking place and counterattacks taking place between the US and China? Who will blink first? Joining me on this India Today special broadcast to talk more about this 245% tariffs that have been imposed on Chinese goods is Business Today editor Siddharth Zarabi. Siddharth, there were reports with Chinese retaliatory tariffs and restrictions on Boeing aircraft and procurement by Chinese airlines. The US may be forced to reconsider its decision. That was the conversation till yesterday. But clearly, Donald Trump doesn't appear to be backing down, at least as of now. So is this that game of brinkmanship being escalated to another level? Who blinks first?
Well, very clearly, we are in a trade war winter, Gaurav, and this is between, thankfully, just the United States and China, because the rest of the world is paused. But this 245% headline grabbing number, where does this come from? What really lies behind it? The White House said that China faces up to 245%, and some people, some observers have construed this as another 100% add-on to the 145% tariff that was existing. Well, that's not the case. There are certainly items that face 245%, primarily syringes and needles, for example. And then there are various slabs, lithium-ion batteries, which are so crucial to electric mobility and other usages, are at 173%. Why 245? 245 is on account of the fact that these are the clubbed rate of all the existing tariffs. So the base rate, then the rate that prevailed prior to Donald Trump taking office again. Even Joe Biden had imposed some tariffs, and Trump in his first administration had done that. Then the fentanyl tariffs. Then there are sector-specific tariffs, for example, on steel, on aluminium, on automobiles, and then finally the reciprocal trade tariff bombshell of the 2nd of April. When you add that up, it's 245. But it's not uniform 245. That depends on where that basket was, what was the base rate. So it's pretty complicated. For example, books are at 0%, but toys are at 145%.
So what is Donald Trump specifically targeting in China? What is that big message that he's sending out? What is the impact on consumers in the US? What will the impact be on China? These are several issues that the world is grappling with, because reports suggest there is massive disruption already in supply chains, and many Chinese goods are no longer either cheap or readily available in the United States of America.
So this is a battle that is being fought at this stage with tactical responses in mind. In some ways, in trade terms, America straight away escalated this fight into a nuclear battle, really. It did not wait for a conventional arms battle to start. It went ballistic straight away. What has China done? Two actions that show us the calibrated differential response. The first one being by denying Boeing a market in China, which is the world's largest civil aviation market outside of the United States. You are hurting a symbol of American manufacturing. That company has had its own fair share of problems. Will this impact their business? Maybe they will divert it to the other countries, including India, which is a very large buyer. The second bit is the denial of rare earths, which will impact America's high technology sector. But remember, at the heart of it, the battle, the game plan hasn't changed. And we have discussed that previously. The American game plan is very simple. Attack China and reduce its capability in manufacturing, because China has scale which is much higher than the United States. Let me just give you two data points.
Yes.
China produces 20 times the amount of cement that America does, 13 times steel, 3 times cars, and twice that much power. So imagine the differential, and this is what America wants to sort of do away with. The question remains, can Donald Trump in 4 years unwind what took 40 years to happen, the rise of China? The jury is out on that. But in the short term, it's very clear that this is a battle that is being fought very, very hard.
Okay, stay with me for a moment. So you heard Martin Wolf. Rahul Kanwal also spoke to a professor of Chinese history and business at Harvard University, Professor William Kirby, about this ongoing tariff war between the US and China. What's the thinking? Let's listen in to a small excerpt of that interview.
In the belligerence with which Xi Jinping has hit back, he's not come to the negotiating table like Trump said, we'll have a meeting, we'll try and talk things out. Xi doesn't seem interested. Why is that?
Well, I don't think any country could not react to the kind of aggressive tariffs as this near declaration of economic war by the United States on China, at least so it appears at this 145% rate. That does not apply to all goods, for example, and some of the most important goods and most valuable goods are exempt from those tariffs. It's really quite a complex and messy situation. But I don't think President Xi would have had any choice but to respond. And it isn't just President Xi. I think any Chinese leader would have no choice but to respond in some way or other. And I can guarantee you that if India were suddenly hit with 145% tariff increase, Mr. Modi, I think, would be hard-pressed not to respond to this. This is what governments do. They have to respond. They have domestic constituencies. They have to, if there is to be a negotiation, they will want to go in with a stronger rather than weaker hand. And there are, thousands of American businesses in China, millions and millions of Americans who regularly are customers of Chinese goods. These are all constituents in what had been a largely beneficial bilateral economic relationship between the United States and China over the last quarter century.
Will this tariff war lead to an economic decoupling between Beijing and DC, given how intertwined these two economies are? Is that even possible? Is the world likely to be divided into two trading blocs?
Right. I think it is possible. I think it's unlikely, but I think it is possible. These two countries, in many ways, could not be more intertwined in their economies, more mutually reliant one on another in their economies. At the same time, you have a history of U.S.-China relations at times when we were deeply involved, for example, politically and militarily in China in the 1940s, ending with a total cutoff of relations from the early 1950s until the early 1970s, and really until the early 1980s in practical terms. So it is possible to see decoupling, but that was a period of enormous tragedy, we must remember. It's a period when Americans and Chinese fought each other in the utterly needless Korean War. It is a time in which all business contacts were severed, all academic contacts, which had been very robust between American and Chinese universities, were severed. And if we believe that decoupling is somehow to the benefit of either the United States and China, then we actually don't know our history at all.
So there are multiple apprehensions about this tariff war in Siddharth. One of those apprehensions are global fears of recession in the United States of America, problems in China, problems across the world. You've been speaking to your sources both in North Block and South Block in India and in the Capitol Hill and in the United States of America. Has Donald Trump wargamed this? Is this a very dangerous game of Russian roulette that's being played with China just to see who blinks first and who's the last man standing?
At least in terms of the rollout, we perhaps hadn't anticipated or imagined, but this is a script that Donald Trump actually started off in his first term. In some ways, him not coming to power again at that time meant that there was a brief interruption. He's come back now and clearly has upped the ante. With regard to the impact, I just want to quickly draw on the India impact, because in all of this, it is very, very significant to note. The key question is, can the United States decouple from China, reduce its dependence, and reclaim its earlier hitherto position several decades ago as the world's #1 manufacturing power. Make no mistake, China is the world's dominant manufacturing superpower, in fact. It cannot do it alone, and that is why the trade deals that are being currently discussed, including with India, amongst the handful of countries along with Korea and Japan, where serious discussions are underway, and this 90-day pause will tell us what will happen to the global economy. If the United States is able to stitch together 7-8 major deals, apart from the smaller ones, because the number of countries, as the US has said, is 75 negotiations. But if it is able to do the big 8-10, including with India and other major manufacturing and economies across the world, it will mean that the United States has created an alliance. Remember, it went to war in Iraq and others with the alliance where it was the primary mover and shaker. In some ways, in trade terms, it will have to have allies along with itself to take on China. And by all reckoning, if you were to total up the GDP of all the major economies in the world, whether it's Australia, Canada, the EU, Japan, Korea, India, everything, that is almost $60 trillion versus China's $18 trillion. So yes, this will take time to pan out, but my money is on the fact that if the United States is able to stitch together an alliance that wants to take on China, and many countries have different issues with China, including India, for example, then I think there might be a very different ending to what seems like a very, very messy affair at this point of time.
It does appear to be messy, but it remains to be seen who has the staying capacity, who is willing to stay in this battle for longer, for long-term goals. Because remember, ultimately, there can only be one victor, either China or America. And China clearly wants to be #1. Should that happen, would that be advantage India or a massive disadvantage for India, given what China has been doing at India's borders, claiming it wants good ties with India despite what happens at the borders? And we'll be tracking that story very closely. Siddharth Zarabi for joining me here on this India Today special. Many thanks.